Sometimes the people who raised you can make you feel like a stranger at your own family table. And the moment you realize that truth, it changes the way you see everything you thought was love. My name is Marina Cole, and I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Last month, my parents hosted their 35th wedding anniversary at one of the most expensive restaurants downtown. I left work late, still in my blazer, hoping I could at least join them for dessert. By the time I walked in, the candles had burned out and the plates were already empty. My father looked up from his chair with a calm smile and slid a folded receipt across the table toward me. "You can cover this, right?" he asked, his tone casual, as if it were the most natural request in the world. I unfolded it. The total read $2,500. Before I could say a word, my brother leaned back, raised his glass, and said, "You're our family ATM, Marina. Pay up." His voice carried enough mockery to draw laughter from everyone around the table. My mother laughed. My father did too. The sound of their amusement filled the room, but I sat there frozen, holding that piece of paper as if it were proof that I had finally become nothing more than their bank account. I wanted to speak to defend myself, but the words never came. Their laughter echoed long after I left the restaurant, ringing louder than the traffic outside. That night, I told myself it was just another dinner, but deep down, I knew something had shifted forever. 2 weeks later, a man called me with something none of them expected. "If you've ever been taken for granted by your own family, stay with me until the end. You might realize that sometimes walking away is the only way to be free." That night, I couldn't sleep. The laughter of my brother Owen and my mom kept replaying in my mind like an echo that refused to fade. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces lit by the restaurant's soft lights, heard the sound of their laughter mixing with clinking glasses, and felt the same cold distance I had felt sitting at that table. It was strange how silence could be louder than noise when it was filled with disappointment. As I lay there in the dark, memories began to surface, not of love or warmth, but of the quiet ways I had been taken for granted. I thought about the evening Dad called me in his usual calm voice, asking for help to cover his car payment. He had said it was only temporary and that he would pay me back soon. Of course he never did. I convinced myself it was fine because he was my father and helping him was what good daughters did. Months later, Mom told me she needed money to start her bakery, just a small push to make her dream come true. I transferred the entire amount the same day, happy to help. She thanked me once, but later when she posted about her self-made business, my name wasn't mentioned. Owen was worse. He once called me when his freelance projects dried up. He told me he just needed to get through a slow season. I wired the money, believing him. A few weeks later, I saw photos of him at a music festival holding a new gaming console. When I asked about it, he laughed and said, "Relax, you make enough to spare." I laughed along, then pretending it didn't sting. It was easier to ignore the ache than admit that my family had begun treating my kindness like a given. Lying there, I realized how many times I had heard the same words. "It's just a little help, Marina." It was always just a little help. But those little things had added up to something heavy, something that had quietly pressed down on me for years. Every favor they asked, every debt they ignored, every laugh that followed my silence, all of it had shaped me into their safety net. They never asked if I could afford it or if I was tired. They only reminded me that I could pay, so I should. I rolled over, staring at my phone on the nightstand. The screen glowed faintly, showing the family group chat pinned to the top. The last message was from Mom, a photo of everyone at dinner smiling as if the night had been perfect, with the caption, "A wonderful family evening." I stared at that image until it blurred, not from tears but from exhaustion. Something inside me quietly shifted. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. I opened the chat settings and tapped Leave Group. A box appeared asking if I was sure. For the first time in years, I didn't hesitate. I pressed yes. The room was suddenly silent, but it didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. I lay back on the pillow, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling, realizing how strange freedom could feel, unfamiliar, almost fragile, but real. When morning came, the city outside was already alive. Sunlight spilled through my blinds, filling the room with soft light. I got up, slowly poured myself a cup of coffee, and stood by the window. Down below, people hurried to work, holding cups and briefcases, lost in their own worlds. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to rush anywhere or prove anything. The apartment was quiet, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt like mine. I thought about the years I had spent believing that love was measured by how much you could give. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe love, the kind that lasts, is built on respect, not debt. And as the morning light touched my face, I understood that sometimes the only way to love your family is to stop letting them use you. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. It looked ordinary, white, sealed neatly, and marked with the logo of Pittsburgh Trust, a bank I had never used. My name, Marina Cole, was printed clearly across the front in sharp black ink. I stood there for a moment, holding it between my fingers, wondering if it was junk mail or something serious. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Inside was a single document, folded with precision. When I unfolded it, my eyes caught the number first, $18,000, typed neatly next to the word loan. Beneath it was a contract bearing my full name and a signature that looked almost but not entirely like mine. For a few seconds, my mind refused to make sense of it. My first thought was that it had to be a mistake, maybe a clerical error or someone with a similar name. I had never taken out a loan in my life. I checked the dates, the branch, even the loan reference number, but none of it meant anything to me. Then, at the bottom of the page, I saw it co-signed by Owen Cole. My breath caught in my throat. The paper slipped from my hand and landed softly on the kitchen counter. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the refrigerator. I picked up the document again, reading the signature over and over. My own name stared back at me in a handwriting that mimicked mine perfectly. My brother Owen had always been careless but forging my name. That was something I could not even imagine him doing. I stood frozen until my phone began to ring. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number from a local area code. Without thinking, I answered. "Hello." My voice came out quieter than I expected. A polite male voice responded, calm and professional. "Good morning, this is Mark Lawson from Pittsburgh Trust. May I speak with Ms. Marina Cole?" "This is she," I replied, gripping the phone tighter. He continued, "I'm calling regarding your joint loan with Mr. Owen Cole. We've been unable to reach him for the last 2 weeks, and as the co-signer, we wanted to confirm your awareness of the overdue balance." It took me several seconds to form words. "I'm sorry," I said slowly. "There must be a mistake. I never signed any loan agreement with Owen." Mark's tone softened, but his words were steady. "The document on file bears your signature, Ms. Cole. It was processed here at our downtown branch. We can arrange an appointment if you'd like to review the original paperwork." I felt my stomach tighten. "Yes," I whispered. "Please send me a copy." After the call ended, I stood in my kitchen, still holding the phone. My reflection in the dark window looked like a stranger, pale still and unsure whether to scream or cry. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe Owen had used my personal documents. Maybe Dad or Mom had given him access thinking I'd approve. The thought made me dizzy. I walked to the counter and stared at the contract again. The signature wasn't mine, but it was close enough to fool anyone. I had trusted my family with everything, my time, my money, my patience, but this was something else. This wasn't carelessness. This was betrayal. The next morning, I received an email from Mark with a scanned copy of the full agreement. Every detail was there: my name, my address, even my driver's license number. The signature looked practiced, as if someone had traced it more than once. I didn't know whether to feel violated or foolish for still being surprised. I poured myself a glass of water, my hands shaking slightly. The glass clinked against the counter as I set it down. I kept asking myself the same question: how far would my brother go before realizing what he was doing to me? I looked at the phone again, half expecting it to ring. It didn't. The silence stretched through the apartment, thick and unbearable. That evening, I sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. Somewhere across town, Owen was probably laughing, unaware that the foundation of our family trust had just cracked beyond repair. I didn't know what I would do next, but I knew one thing for sure: I was done being the one who stayed quiet. The next morning, I drove straight to the downtown office. The air was cold and heavy, and the streets of Pittsburgh were still half asleep. The glass building of Pittsburgh Trust shimmered in the morning light, neat and impersonal. As I parked and walked toward the entrance, I felt a strange calm settle inside me, the kind that comes after running out of tears. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of coffee and new paper. A receptionist greeted me politely, then directed me to the loan department. I was asked to wait while they retrieved my file. The walls were lined with framed certificates and photos of smiling employees, all symbols of trust and reliability. Sitting there, I wondered what those words even meant anymore. A young woman in a gray suit finally approached me, holding a folder. "Ms. Cole, I'm Rebecca Mills' records officer. I understand you'd like to verify a loan account." Her tone was professional, but her eyes softened when she noticed how tightly I was holding my bag. "Yes," I said quietly. "I need to see the original file. There's been a mistake." She nodded and led me to a small glass-walled room. She opened the folder and placed several documents on the table. My name appeared on each one: on the application, the cosigner line, even on the ID copy. The handwriting looked frighteningly close to mine. I leaned forward, scanning every line, trying to find a clue that would prove this was not real. "The address is correct," I murmured, "and the signature looks similar, but the phone number—" Rebecca glanced down and read aloud, "Primary contact 42-555-0147. Then she looked back at me. "Does that number belong to you?" My stomach dropped. "No," I said softly. "That's my brother's." Rebecca's brows furrowed slightly. "Then I'm afraid this might be identity misuse. You should file a report. But based on what we have here, the system recognizes this loan as valid with both parties responsible." Her words blurred in my mind. I tried to focus, but the room felt smaller, the air thinner. I asked to see the identification copy used during the application. She hesitated, then turned the page inside the folder. There it was: my driver's license, my photo, my signature. Everything was real, except I had never handed it to anyone. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "Where did this come from?" I managed to ask. Rebecca sighed. "It was scanned at the downtown branch 3 months ago. If you'd like, we can provide the timestamp and the employee name who handled it." 3 months ago. I remembered Owen calling me around that time, saying he needed to check something with my credit score for a client. He had sounded casual, almost apologetic. I had sent him a photo of my ID that same day, thinking it was harmless. My hands trembled slightly on the table. Rebecca closed the folder gently. "Ms. Cole, I know this must be upsetting. I'll email you the full report and a copy of all documents. You should contact our fraud department immediately." I nodded, but my voice wouldn't come. When I left the room, the receptionist offered me a polite smile that I could barely return. My steps echoed through the marble hall, each one heavier than the last. Outside, the sky had turned gray, the kind that promised rain but refused to deliver it. I stood beside my car, looking at the city's skyline reflected on the wet pavement. I wasn't crying. There was nothing left to cry about. It felt as if someone had quietly drained every drop of blood from me and replaced it with silence. On the drive home, I kept one hand on the wheel, the other gripping the folder with my name printed across it. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked calm, but inside everything had collapsed. The realization struck me with quiet precision: maybe I never had a family at all. Maybe I only had people who learned how to use me. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house. The sky over Pittsburgh hung low and gray, pressing down on the quiet streets. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, my hands still gripping the steering wheel. I had rehearsed the words in my head all morning, but as I looked at the familiar windows, my chest tightened. I had no plan beyond the truth. When I stepped inside, the smell of Mom's potpourri filled the air, lavender and lemon, too sweet to feel real. My parents were sitting on the couch, eyes fixed on the television, while my brother lounged in the recliner with a half-empty can of soda. It was almost peaceful, disturbingly so. "Turn it off," I said quietly. My voice sounded strange even to me. Dad looked up but didn't reach for the remote. Mom smiled faintly. "Marina, honey, we didn't expect you today." I walked to the coffee table and placed the folder on top of the glossy magazine stack. "Explain this," I said, my tone flat. Owen didn't even glance at the papers. He crossed his arms, leaned back, and let out a dry laugh. "You have the money, so what's the problem?" The words hung in the air like smoke. I looked at Dad, searching for something, guilt, shame, anything, but he only rubbed the back of his neck and stared at the floor. Mom shifted uncomfortably, pretending to straighten a vase. "Maybe we should talk after dinner," she murmured, her voice too calm, too practiced. I opened the folder and spread the documents across the table. The forged signature, the loan contract, the copy of my ID. "You all knew," I said. "You let him do this." Owen rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, Marina. It's not like you're struggling. You've always been the one who has everything. I just needed a little help." My pulse quickened. "Help? You forged my name." He shrugged, his smirk widening. "Your family. You owe us." For a moment, everything went quiet. Even the TV static seemed to fade. I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the record button. "Say that again," I said evenly. Mom gasped. "Marina, what are you doing?" "Protecting myself," I said. "Because apparently, no one else will." Through the front window, I noticed a shadow outside. It was Lisa, my parents' next-door neighbor. She was trimming her rose bushes, but when Owen's voice rose, she paused and looked toward the house. I saw her frown, then take a cautious step closer, as if trying to hear. Owen stood up, his voice growing louder. "You think you're better than us now, because you have a fancy job and a nice car. You're nothing without this family." I looked him in the eye. "Not anymore." Silence fell again, heavy and unbroken. Mom pressed her hand against her chest, whispering my name like it was both a plea and a warning. Dad still hadn't moved. For the first time in my life, I realized how small they looked, three people bound together by guilt sitting in a living room that suddenly felt foreign. I gathered the papers, slid them back into the folder, and turned toward the door. "You'll hear from my lawyer," I said simply. Owen scoffed, but I didn't stay to listen. As I stepped outside, I met Lisa's eyes for a brief second. She didn't say a word, but the concern on her face told me she had heard enough. That night, I called my friend and lawyer, Cara Levine. It was the first time I allowed myself to speak freely. I told her everything: the forged loan, the confrontation, the silence that followed. Cara didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said quietly, "We'll handle this. But you need to be ready once we start. There's no turning back." I looked out the window at the dark skyline. "I was ready a long time ago," I said. 2 days later, Cara sent the official notice. I received a copy in my email that morning, its tone sharp and formal, stripped of emotion. The letter demanded full repayment of the loan within 45 days or legal action would follow. Seeing my name in that document made it feel real in a way that nothing else had. It was no longer a family issue, it was a matter of law. Cara Ever Precise called to confirm that the notice had been delivered to Owen and my parents. "They'll try to contact you," she said calmly. "Don't respond. Everything they say will be guided by panic, not reason." I agreed, though a part of me already knew silence would be the hardest thing to maintain. By evening, the first message arrived. It was from Mom. "Please, Marina. He's your brother. You don't want to ruin his life. We can fix this quietly." I stared at her words for a long time, tracing the familiar rhythm of guilt beneath them. An hour later, Dad's email appeared, longer, colder. "You've embarrassed this family. Your mother can't sleep. Is this how you repay us for everything we've done?" I didn't reply. I deleted both messages but couldn't erase the sting that lingered afterward. The next morning, the storm went public. Owen posted a status on his social media account. "Some people forget who raised them." It was a simple sentence, but it carried the weight of accusation. Within hours, it had gathered dozens of comments. Our relatives chimed in with half-truths and guesses. Distant cousins offered prayers for family healing. Strangers joined in weaving narratives out of nothing. Lisa, my parents' neighbor, texted me a screenshot. "I saw this. You okay?" I replied with a single word. "Fine." It wasn't true, but I couldn't explain the mix of anger and disbelief pulsing beneath my calm. I watched from the sidelines as people debated my character. Some called me selfish. Others defended me, saying no one knew the whole story. The attention grew quickly, feeding on itself until even local acquaintances began tagging me in comments. My name, once ordinary, felt heavy in every sentence. Cara called that evening. Her voice carried the measured steadiness that I was beginning to depend on. "Let the noise fade," she said. "The truth doesn't need defense. It only needs time." Her words settled over me like a thin blanket, not enough to warm, but enough to cover the rawness. I nodded, though she couldn't see it. "All right," I said quietly. After hanging up, I opened my laptop, scrolled through the avalanche of posts and reactions, and then closed it again. I logged out of every account. For the first time in years, the silence felt heavier than any notification sound. That night, I sat by my window, city lights flickering like restless thoughts. I realized that every argument I could make, every explanation, every proof, would only feed the noise. They weren't listening to understand. They were listening to choose sides. And I had no interest in being a spectacle. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The air was cool, the kind that carried faint traces of rain. I made coffee, dressed for work, and left my phone on the counter screen dark. At the office, my coworkers spoke about weekend plans and deadlines. No one mentioned my family, and I was grateful. The normalcy felt sacred, almost fragile. When lunch came, I ate alone in the small park behind the building. I thought about Owen, about Mom's pleading tone, about Dad's anger that always masked fear. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to fix any of it. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was acting quietly, deliberately. As I returned to my desk, I saw a message from Cara. "Everything's proceeding as expected. Stay focused." I smiled faintly and typed my reply, "I am." On the 45th day, I got an email from Pittsburgh Trust. The subject line was plain, almost clinical: "Loan account closure confirmation." My stomach tightened as I clicked it open. The first line read, "The outstanding balance of $18,000 has been paid in full." I read it twice before I truly understood what it meant. The debt that had been forged in my name was gone. Someone had finally paid it. A follow-up call from my lawyer, Cara, confirmed it later that afternoon. "It's settled," she said. "No more legal action. The funds came from Owen's account, likely transferred by your parents." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Relief didn't feel like victory. It felt like the quiet after a storm, heavy, damp, and strangely hollow. By the end of the week, the fallout began to ripple. Cara forwarded an internal memo she had received from a contact at Owen's workplace. He had been terminated for ethical misconduct and misuse of personal data. The report didn't mention my name, but I didn't need it to. The words were enough. I learned later that my parents had sold their SUV to help him cover part of the repayment. It was the same car they used for every family trip, the one Mom always insisted was her favorite. When I heard that, I didn't feel satisfaction, only a deep fatigue, the kind that seeps into your bones. No one reached out to me again. Not Owen, not Mom, not Dad. The calls stopped. The messages stopped. The silence stretched first into days, then into weeks. One evening, I received a letter with no return address. The handwriting was my mother's. Inside just one sentence: "We hope you're happy now." I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer without replying. There was nothing left to say. In the days that followed, I blocked every number linked to my family. I changed my email, deleted old contacts, and updated my address at work. Each small act felt like peeling away another layer of noise until only my own breath remained. At night, I found myself sitting on the balcony of my apartment overlooking the quiet steel skyline of Pittsburgh. The city lights shimmered like tiny embers, steady and indifferent. I opened a bottle of red wine that had been sitting unopened for months, a gift from a client I'd once helped through bankruptcy. The irony wasn't lost on me. I poured a glass and watched the surface tremble slightly in the wind. For the first time in a long while, there was no anger, no guilt, no obligation pressing against my chest. Just stillness. Cara had once told me, sometimes peace doesn't arrive as joy. It arrives as the absence of chaos. Sitting there, I finally understood what she meant. I had spent so many years trying to be the glue that held everything together, only to realize that glue can't save what's already cracked beyond repair. I thought about Owen, my brother, once my childhood shadow, and wondered if he regretted anything. I thought about Mom's trembling hands when she lied Dad's silence that had always spoken louder than words. Yet as those memories surfaced, they no longer hurt. They simply existed like old photographs, fading at the edges. When the bottle was half empty, I leaned back in my chair, the night air brushing against my face. Somewhere below, a train passed, its distant hum echoing through the city. I raised my glass slightly, not in celebration, but in quiet closure. For the first time, I didn't feel like anyone's daughter, sister, or provider. I felt like myself. And that, after everything was enough. Half a year later, I can finally talk about it without shaking. The sharp edges of memory have softened like stones smoothed by water. I now live in a small apartment near Mount Washington, overlooking the same skyline that once watched me break. Mornings are quiet here. I wake to the hum of buses below and the faint scent of roasted coffee drifting from the corner cafe. It feels like starting over, not with grand plans, but with gentle steadiness. Cara visits sometimes, usually on Sundays. She brings 2 cups of black coffee and a knowing smile, the kind that doesn't need words. We sit by the window, the city glimmering behind her, and talk about everything except the past. When she finally asks how I feel, I tell her it's like running a finger across an old scar. I still remember where it came from, but it no longer hurts. She nods, as if she has heard that answer 100 times from people learning how to begin again. I spend most of my evenings reading or walking along Grandview Avenue. From there, the whole city stretches beneath me, silver and quiet. Sometimes I think about Owen, Mom, and Dad, not with anger, but with distance, the kind that time builds like a wall of glass. I don't wish them harm, nor do I wish them back. Forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't always require reconciliation. I started writing again. This story began as a personal reminder, something I needed to put into words, before it dissolved into silence. But somewhere along the way, it turned into something more, a lesson I didn't know I was still learning. You can forgive people, but never let them near your peace again. Sometimes love isn't the problem, boundaries are. When people keep taking and calling it love, you must be the one to stop it. Saying enough isn't cold, it's self-respect. Peace is earned when you stop paying for others' comfort with your own pain. Thank you for staying until the end. I truly appreciate your time and empathy. If you've ever had to distance yourself from family for peace, share your thoughts below. Your story might help someone else find courage too.